Charlie, absolute pleasure, and thank you for joining us on the Housing Collective podcast. For the listeners, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself and your organisation?
Thanks, Tom, and congratulations on your new venture, and thanks for asking me to do this. Well, I'm a Boltonian. I'm a Northerner by trade. I'm currently the Chief Executive and very proud to be of Moscare St Vincent's, based in the Northwest here in Manchester. And I've been with the company for about 20 years. I love housing. I've worked in the housing sector for a long time, probably more time than I'd care to admit, but I think it's about 35 years now. And I just love everything that we do. And it's about that Maslow's hierarchy thing. You know, everybody should have a good home and a springboard to life, and the ability to get on in life and to grow old and age well and grow up and do things in life that your home is the first starting point from that, isn't it? So it's just a firm belief with that. So I think that's why I work in the housing sector, and I do tons of things around that. And I also try to be a good mum and a good daughter as well. So because we've all got multiple hats and lots of jobs, haven't we, that we do. So that's a little bit about me.
Haven't we just? And we'll definitely kind of unpick some of that as well today, Charlie. So you talk about you've worked in housing for a number of years now. So can you tell us a bit about your journey, and also probably some, from a leadership perspective, some of the challenges that you've faced whilst going on that journey to becoming Chief Executive of MSV?
Yeah, I mean, MSV is a great organisation, and that sort of sprang from the merger of St Vincent's and Moscare, and it was, I think, both organisations, the reason I've stayed for so long have been based around values, and I think that's one of the things that keeps me grounded in the sector and within the organisation, is about being about values and being values led. I didn't plan to be a chief exec at any point. It's just something that I've worked hard all of my career. I've always believed in what we do, like I say. I've always been a bit sort of daring and tried things and tried new things, even if they're a bit scary. And I was asked to go for the job of Chief Executive of St Vincent's when Peter, my predecessor back in the St Vincent's days, retired. Fantastic guy, learned a lot from him. A bit eccentric, I would say that to him, but he was fantastic. And so I felt a kind of duty to go for the role then, because I really loved what the organisation was about. And it was never about a title or, progression in the way of like climbing a career ladder, if you want to look at it that way. It was about doing what we do. And then when we merged with Moscare, because Rob retired, I became the chief exec of MSV, but I went through a rigorous process for that. I think you've got to have a mandate to do the job. I think you've got to believe in it. And I think it's been challenging. I've had lots of challenges along the way. So it's been about 11 years now since I've been a chief exec. And so I've seen so much change in the sector, and so many challenges. We've had some horrible punctuation points, such as Grenfell. And what happened with our Bishak, and some of the real tragedies that we've seen, and they're real wake-up moments actually about the seriousness and the responsibility and the accountability of the role. So they're massive challenges. And then of course I've had, that it was quite a male-dominated sector in terms of being a chief exec, if I'm honest. When I first became chief, that's not the case now. In Greater Manchester, it's largely female chief execs, which is interesting. Yeah. I've had lots of challenges along the way, such as we had a downgrade at one point because we'd missed some fire risk certificates and issues, and that I learned a lot from that, and that was about being absolutely rigorous about that. The big six compliance areas, and damp and mold comes in as the sort of seventh of the big six compliance areas now. Ultimately this job is about keeping people safe, isn't it? So I've learned lots from, and I think it's always for me been about people and the journey, and learning from the people around me, seeing people succeed, whether it's your colleagues or it's like one of the Foyer residents goes on to Oxford University, or two that have come back recently, they've graduated as midwives. So just lots of things that inspire you and put fire in your belly, but lots of things that have been dead challenging as well. So my first challenge was that I had to ask the founder member of St Vincent's to step down because he'd breached the 9-year rule, and he'd been on the board for 42 years. So I had to
but that was an interesting conversation.
It was an interesting conversation. Fantastic guy. He was a former Lord Mayor of Manchester, but yeah, there was a few governance issues like that. So but I've never been afraid to tackle a challenge, and I think one of my mantras is choose your battles well as well. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah,
I really like that. Really like that a lot. And just to pick up on when you first took that role as chief exec at St Vincent's, Charlie, you were a young chief executive at the time, and still are a very young chief executive. But you look at, and you mentioned there, I can always remember GM was, from a gender and age demographic, it was very male dominated, and from an age demographic, very different to what it is today. So did you face any initial challenges going into that GM working group?
I did feel different. I was one of probably 3 female chief execs at the time, and but the other 2 had been around for a long time. So I was obviously inexperienced and, as you say, young. And I don't agree that I'm still young, but I was 44 at the time. So yeah, and I remember being quite, if I'm honest, I've been quite intimidated by that, and wanting to say the right things. And I'd had a couple of challenges actually with people in the sector, and I won't say who they are, and people that I worked with who'd been quite patronising to me and a bit, oh, well, you've got a short skirt on today. That kind of seriously had those kind of comments at the time. So yeah, it was challenging, but then I just learned to hold my own, really.
Yeah.
And that it's about what you bring and what you contribute and what you believe in and your passion for things that counts, not about your gender or your age or, but yeah, it was different. It feels different now. It really does. And I hope we're on a journey for much, much more diversity in leadership. We're doing this Boost program, which is I say program, it's actually a movement for change in Greater Manchester at the moment. And that's about getting more people of colour into leadership roles. So it's mentoring, it's change programs within organisations, and really challenging ourselves about recruitment processes. So it's something that you might be interested in.
For sure, definitely.
Actually, Tom. So yeah, but yeah, it's evolving, isn't it? Slowly,
without a shadow of doubt. And like you say there, with that Boost program, it's not so much a program, it's a transition of change, which does need to happen, and as it did need to happen going back probably 8 years ago, when it was a very male dominated GM chief exec group, and it's completely different now, which is great to see. It's just the other side of diversity now that we need to improve. And just you talk about that, where you clearly that there were that initial challenges that you faced as a first time chief executive. Do you think those challenges, along with the 11 years of some considerable challenges around Grenfell and the FRA downgrade that you spoke about, do you think that's now shaped how you lead MSV?
Definitely. As I said before, I think things like the downgrade, I took that ever so seriously. I remember at the time, I was on local and national stages ranting about the fact that the supporting people had been removed, and then there was a threat to LHA allowances for supported housing that really did threaten it was existential threat to the supported housing. And I know how important that is and what that does. So I'd been on sort of, having a rant here and there about that issue, but also pulling together evidence for making a case against that. And actually it got overturned through national efforts of a lot of people. But at the same time, the FRA downgrade came in. And, when I looked through some of the certificates, some of those were in supported housing, and that those are the people that we need to be keeping absolutely safe. And there was no detriment, and no harm came to anybody, but it was a big learning point for me about how, seriously we need to take compliance and, safety and keeping people safe. So, and obviously Grenfell was a massive wake-up call for all of us. What happened to little R. Bishak was just, it's just been so tragic. And what I've seen there has been really heartening, and it's been everybody sort of coalescing around doing something about that and change it. We're here in GM, we're all through the coalition of willing that we've got, working on an action plan together, and making sure we're learning from each other and challenging each other. There are so many people that I've learned from, and so many events that have happened that have definitely shaped who I am. And I think one of the biggest, probably, I don't think I've got lots and lots of skills, and I'm one of those people that you probably asked me about this, about have imposter syndrome, and sometimes you get up every day and you think, oh, am I doing this right? But I think I have got a great deal of empathy, and I realise that this job, it is about homes, but it's very, very much about people. So it's about the people that live in our homes and our neighbourhoods, but also the people that work for us. So I think it's keeping it real, being feeling it. So
being real and being authentic as well. I think that's vitally important. And clearly you care so much about not only the role, but also the communities that you serve. It's clear to see, Charlie. And just on that, you mentioned the word imposter, or the phrase imposter syndrome. Where does that sit with you?
Well, somebody said something really interesting to me about that the other day, that saying you've got imposter syndrome is just about your own ego. So, which is an important point. So I do think there is a male-female issue there. I think it's just from testing the water, speaking to other people about that, and there are essays about it, aren't there, that women feel that more than men. Yeah. I just have to catch myself on sometimes, and have a chat with myself to about I can do something. And I said earlier that sometimes things are scary, like, for example, speaking at a big colleague conference, or to a group of residents in Moss Side, a residents association like we've just done recently, or speaking on a national stage. That's scary for most people, isn't it? Most of us are not natural in that space. But I've got some really good advice once, which was about, it's not about you and what how you feel about yourself. It's about what you're saying, and it's about the audience, and it's about the people that you're talking to, and just focus on that. And I think that's really, and hold your nerve about it, because I think that's really important. So but like everybody else, I do have a little bit of it, but I do try and have a little chat with myself about it and think, right, you can do what you can do, and there's loads of people around you that know much more, and defer to them when you need to, saying you don't have to know everything in this job. You couldn't possibly know everything, could you? So I do get it from time to time, but it's I think it's learning to accept that in a lot of ways.
Of course. And also, like I say, some great advice that you were given as well around kind of it's not about you, and think about actually the words that are coming out, and the subject matter as well, which I think is really important. And just with saying that then, Charlie, and around the imposter syndrome, I think we've all seen in the sector the volume of retirements at the chief executive level over the last 12, 18 months has been more than I've ever experienced in 11, 12 years in housing recruitment. So what we're seeing is there are more and more senior leaders taking their first step into a chief executive role, or starting to think about doing that for obvious reasons. So given you talked about that advice you were given, what advice would you give to those aspiring chief execs, or those taking their first step into a chief executive role?
I think I talked before about sort of trying things and being brave, and saying yes to things even though they might seem a little bit intimidating. I think being ready to move into a chief exec role, it's a very different job. It's you kind of very accountable, but you feel like you sometimes between a rock and a hard place. And so in some ways it's quite disempowering as a role, because you're trying to place yourself between lots of different audiences and people, and try and keep an even keel. So you've really got to want to do it and take the accountability that comes with it. And it's not about the title, and not about that next rung up the ladder, as I was saying before. So I think being authentically wanting to do it. And I think for me, it's like the why. Why do I do this? It's because I want to do as much as I possibly can whilst I'm still in this career. And I'm very driven by that. We've got a massive housing crisis. We've got so much overcrowding and families in temporary accommodation. there's that the Nat Fed produced something a couple of weeks ago, which was about how many hundreds of thousands of kids are sleeping in a bed with another person in this country because we've got such a housing crisis. So and that whole thing about everybody should have a decent home. So it's like, if you feel that why, then just go for it. And I think people get that, don't they, and connect with it. So I think knowing who you are and your own values and your own beliefs is really important. And it took me ages, to be honest, to just understand where I stood, in as a chief exec. I definitely.
And what sorry, Charlie, what are they for you? What those values there? It's like, say, it's taken a while, and it does take a lot of time to get the right values. What are true to you? What are your values?
Well, we've got this thing at MSV, we're a sort of medium-sized organisation. We're spread across the Northwest, and we do lots of different things. But our mantra is, and one of our values is doing the decent thing. And I kind of live by that, to be honest. Yeah. And so I think doing the decent thing doesn't mean that you always have to say yes to everything, that you have to be all things to all people, but you have to feel like you've been fair, and that whatever you've done during the day, you can go to bed at night and you've been fair in, even if it's been a tough decision or a tough call, because you have to do that in this job. There's no question. Yeah. And sometimes taking the hard decisions, saying no to things and delivering difficult messages is the decent thing to do. So but I do think that I feel quite strongly about that one. So I think doing the decent thing is one. Being fair, as I said, just believing in what we do. I think empathy for me is really, really important. I think try and understand where other people are coming from, trying to be really inclusive. And I think we're all on a journey, aren't we, at the moment? I hate that, when people say journey, it annoys me if I've just said it. But we're all trying to understand proper inclusion, and things that have come out in the aftermath of what happened to our Bishak, and some of the challenges we've had in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, and those sort of wake-up calls that we've had. I think not being afraid to talk about things like white privilege, and understanding that you can be an ally, and you can but try to understand people, try and learn, and just be an ally to people. We've got lots of different groups within MSV that have been movements that have started by people in the organisation. We've got like Pride Group and an anti-racism task force and all that kind of thing. So I think just having some humility and understanding that you've got to understand where you're coming from. Well, my own background, and how I can be an ally for other people and help to lift other people. I think those are all, values that I kind of live by. And then, just as I said before, choosing my battles, because there are so many you could get into.
and with how many conflicting agendas you have to deal with on a daily basis, I could imagine that being a really important piece of advice that you need to take as well.
To be honest, my dad, I think I got that from my dad, and I've never thought that before, but he was very much that kind of person. Like I'd see him every now and again, the red mist would descend, but not very often at all. Yeah. And he would very carefully choose his battles. So,
choosing that battle, that's lovely to hear. And you touched around the values there, Charlie, and I think I'm a firm believer that as a chief executive, you're only as good as the people around you, and so that DNA of, in particular, your executive is so important. So when we talk about the DNA of an executive, in your opinion, what works best, and also what traits are you looking for in your senior team?
I really do agree with that. You're only as good as the people around you. And I do think for aspiring and new chief execs, there possibly may be a tendency to think that you have to know everything, and that you have to be the leader, and you have to sort of like try and control things. And I probably did that as well, but I think letting go and understanding and trusting people. So I think have you read the Patrick Lencioni book around trust and all that? I think that's good stuff. So I think building high trust within your team is really important. And trust doesn't mean that we all sit around and agree and smile at each other. It's challenge, and understanding, what makes other people tick, and respecting the skills of others. I've got a fantastic executive team at the moment, and really, really highly skilled people who are so much better than I am in so many areas. And I think that's great, because you've got lots of ingredients there, haven't you, if people have got the right skills. But I think those skills come with that responsibility to be one team, and you've got executive responsibility, haven't you, about being a leader within the business and role modeling and behaviours and attitudes and all of that kind of stuff. So I think a bit of solidarity and being one team and all of that, and spending time together to do that, is really, really important. But then respecting each other's, skills and areas and departments, and just people getting on with it and coming together as often as you can do to share. I do think sharing is really important, and not working in silos. But I am always learning on this. I've been doing this job for 10, 11 years now, and I keep learning. And I was obviously in an executive team before I became a chief exec. And I think you've got to keep learning and finding the right sort of way of working together.
Definitely. You mentioned there as well around that togetherness, and I think that's so important, particularly given all the challenges that you're currently facing. And I think from a recruitment perspective as well, having that culture of togetherness can be a really competitive advantage to retaining your best talent, because I think retention of your best staff should be so high up on your risk register, because it is so competitive at the moment, and having that togetherness is a real competitive advantage that I say there. So you mentioned that's really important for your executive. So that doesn't happen overnight. So what are your lessons on that, and what have you learned over the years of how to get that right?
Had lots of ups and downs in that space, being honest. So and culture, you've mentioned, we've not talked about it, have we? But culture there's that adage, isn't there, about culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can have all the best strategies in the world and structures and systems, but at the heart of that is creating the right conditions and having the right culture for the organization. So I think it boils down to that, think around spending time and ironing things out. So sometimes having to lock yourself into a room to get through. We've just had a 2-day away day, and to go through some of the issues, because we are facing lots of challenge, and the last 2 years have probably been the hardest I've seen in the sector. And that thing, go back to that thing about the why are we all here? If we all believe in what we're doing, then that's a good, that job's a good one there, isn't it? And then it might work together. And I think, you've got to get external support, and you've got to get advice from experts, and sometimes facilitated sessions work, especially if there's a bit of an issue. So, and constantly challenging, ourselves as an exec team. I think that's really important. So, but it's never just a job done. You've got to continue with it and keep going with it.
Keep adding onto it. Brilliant. And I'm really intrigued on this, Charlie, because it's something that people always ask me, is that you talk about those traits that you look for from an executive team. If you're going out to recruit a new executive, and you recently recruited an executive a couple of years ago now, you're looking for those key traits, but how do you? So hard to gauge that in an hour's interview, in an hour's coffee with that person. So what questions do you ask to really probe further to get those values that are right for MSV?
I think there's an opening question, isn't there, about what drives you and what makes you tick. And I always talk about a documentary that I saw when I was a child with my dad, and it was about a journalist who was sleeping rough in London undercover. And people do that all the time nowadays, don't they, in these days of reality TV and investigative journalism and all of that. But it was quite stark, and I was quite horrified about it. I remember talking to him a lot about it at the time. And that is definitely a moment in my life and my history that made me think that I wanted to do something like this. And I thought it was social work, but obviously it became housing. I think asking people why are they in the sector, what it is it about them that makes them tick, and what drives them and what makes them tick. I think, you're right, in an hour of questions you can't get a total feel for people, can you? But you really want to test resilience, I think, because resilience is really key for being an executive in this sector at the moment. I mean, by God, we do need help, like never before, don't we? So maybe asking some questions around times that have been tricky and tough, and we're all a whole person, aren't we? So might have things that are going on in our lives that and you've got to blend it with the job, and I'm not talking about probing into people's personal lives, but trying to get a feel for people's resilience. I think a good question is, people often put referees down, or asking people what are they going to say to me when I get in touch with them, and what if I was to speak to a range of your colleagues, what are they going to tell me, honestly? So
and that'd be the key word, Charlie, as well, honestly.
Yes. I think really delving into problem solving skills at the moment is really good as well. So and then asking people what have they done to help other people achieve, whether that's people within the community or people that they've worked with, those kind of questions. So you get values stuff, don't you, when you're asking those kind of questions?
One example that we're finding at the moment is around resilience, as you rightfully say. And I think and it's quite interesting how over the last couple of years, as you rightfully say, it's probably the most challenging time in the housing sector that a lot of us experience. And resilience is so key. We're actually changing some of the interview questions now of going, instead of going, can you give us one of your biggest successes over the last 2 years? We actually ask, can you talk to us about when you failed over the last 2 years, and how you've not only kind of dusted yourself off and gone again, but also how you've done that with your teams? Because it's easy for you to dust yourself off, but actually taking people in a team that may be quite bruised from a failure, it's taking those on a journey as well. So that's we're definitely finding that perspective. And just you talk about resilience, and we've just resilience is so key in this, and resilience can mean so many different things, but it's definitely vital in any leadership role in housing at the moment. So what techniques do you use yourself to deal with issues that you face on a daily basis?
Resilience is absolutely, it's required at all times at the moment. And so I mean, I do practical things. So I'm one of those people that I give lots of people advice and say, you need to look after yourself, put your own oxygen mask on first, and all that kind of stuff that we all do. And then don't do it myself. So but I started this year with a not to-do list. Instead of a to-do list and a set of New Year's resolutions, which I usually do, and sort of giving myself permission to say no more, because I do have a tendency. It's like that thing of try things and don't be afraid to take new things on, kind of thing. I think it's in my DNA, but sometimes that means you can take too much on. So trying to say no to more things. I think the biggest thing is about holding your nerve in these tough times, and thinking, things do always work out. We've had loads of things that have happened in this sector, and loads of things have happened in my life where you think it's catastrophic. So try not to catastrophize, and think, hold your nerve, and it will, think this too shall pass, and so I think that's really important for your own resilience and well-being. And then I just get out and walk, to be honest, Tom. I just think being outdoors, being in the fresh air, for me, I'm happiest yomping in the hills with my dogs. That's my number one thing that I love to do. I also like a bit of a day where you can just potter and you can switch off, just do some world-class pottering all day at home or something like that. Try and discipline yourself to do that. And yoga, and some like breathing exercises and meditation and things like that. So, but getting that balance of time out, saying no to things, doing the right things, trying to be positive when it's not been a very positive world, and surrounding yourself with positive people. So those are all things that I try to do.
I love that. And also I'd love and I think this is so important, the not to do list. I absolutely love that, because like I say, you being, and obviously Joe, not only with MSV, you're involved in a lot of other things. So I'm no doubt you're pulled from pillar to post, and that naturally will have an impact on your personal well-being as well. And I think people do sometimes, as you say there, you kind of very much advise people to do it and then don't take it on yourself. But I think that's, as a leader, I think it's so important that you do take time for yourself, because as well as that, I think that true leadership is really tested in the tough times, because you can be a great leader when it's all fantastic, but when we are going through this is where the true leadership side, and unless you're giving yourself that personal well-being and taking time for yourself, you'll struggle to do that. And I think you've definitely seemed like you've got that balance, or starting to get that balance anyway.
And it is starting to be honest, and I do think, because we have a tendency, don't we, to feel guilty. So I feel guilty if I'm not doing something for my mum, or guilty if I'm not at work, and all of that sort of stuff. So and I think it's that thing, don't feel like you're being selfish looking after your own well-being, because it's really important. So yeah, definitely agree with that.
And we now look forward, Charlie, and you, as you say there are challenging times, but also you're going through quite some exciting times with MSV. So can you just talk to us a bit more about what your strategic priorities are for the next 6 to 12 months?
Yes, certainly. Well, like most organisations, I mean, MSV's been around for 50 odd years. You know, we've a range of things we're developing. We're looking after customers. We've got very much a focus on customers. We're doing all the sort of basics, but I think that is the thing that every organisation in the land is doing at the moment, is recalibrating, looking at the basics, getting those right in the wake of the spotlight that we found ourselves under, and some humility and honesty about some of the things that maybe have gone a bit awry. And I think some of it is because of legislative stuff and regulatory change. And I just think getting the repairs service, sounds boring, but getting the repairs services right, you know, really doing some work with customers to understand what they need. I think, you know, all the core business of MSV is really important, getting that right, all that compliance stuff, the neighbourhood work, all that. So that's the number one priority. We have a really ambitious plan in Moss Side, which is where I am at the moment in doing this podcast. We're looking at a massive project. I mean, we've invested so much in this area. We're a community anchor in this area and love it.
Amazing.
But we've got 350 new homes that we're working on at the moment with Manchester City Council and the community. And it's a brilliant community-led project that we're working on. And it's linked to some heritage from the area as well, and the Reno nightclub, because it's the site where the nightclub was, working with the West Indian Sports and Social Club, working on a heritage project. So we've got that big project that we're working on, as well as the other pipeline things. We're doing lots of work on positive futures, so whether that's training and employment, or just positive futures around our young persons offer, and then just keep on investing in homes, and that means including energy efficiency works. So we're part of the collaboration in Greater Manchester with Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. We're tackling the worst first properties, you know, your pre-1919 terraces, and that's about, we need to stop saying retrofit and decarbonisation and say it's about people having a healthy home.
Yeah.
And a home that you can actually afford to heat and that feels comfortable to live in, and isn't detrimental to your health. So those are some of the key priorities.
And just what I love as well, Joe, is that you reiterate the word home, because there's so many conversations that we have when it's all about kind of where people talk, particularly from a development perspective, it's units. It's not units, it's someone's home. And I think that's and it means so much to you, clearly, and which is lovely to hear. Along with the day job, Charlie, you're clearly kind of heavily involved within GM, and you are chair of GMHP, which is the Greater Manchester Housing Providers.
Yeah.
For the listeners, could you just explain for those who aren't in the region, what is GMHP, and also what are your strategic priorities over the next 12 months with that as well?
Yeah, of course. So I feel very lucky about being involved in GMHP. So and I've been chair for about 18 months now, but I've been involved in it for 10 years. And it's a proper coalition of the willing. It really is. So it's the 24 main housing providers across Greater Manchester. Between us, we own about 260,000 homes and employ about 30,000 people, and contribute 1.2 billion to GVA in the GM economy. And last year we built 1/3 of all new homes in Greater Manchester.
That's amazing.
As a collective. We also respond to things in the moment. So the damp and mold thing, you know, we immediately jumped. I said this earlier, we jumped on it. we're working together at scale. And the idea with all of it is that we do things at scale. So when Andy Burnham was first lobbying to become mayor of Greater Manchester, and he made homelessness his #1 commitment. And we very much got alongside that. You only have to walk through Piccadilly Gardens and go, you know, and see rough sleeping and the travesty that is.
Yeah.
So, you know, we that led to a social impact bond that we worked on together and collectively. So rather than 1 or 2 of us doing it, if we all do it, and we all put 10 properties in a year, that's the idea, and you scale it up. So, and then that's our Housing First programme, seeing some amazing results from that, and people just going on and doing brilliant things, you know, from having been rough sleeping, and that can be any of us at any time, can't it? Let's face it. So it could happen to any of us. We work with the combined authority in the 10 districts of Greater Manchester, but we also work with health and social care because it's devolved. So I think devolution here is brill, and we've got the Trailblazer, which is the latest exciting stage of that. So getting more control and more local control of things like housing and the way we develop and regenerate. So we've got this tripartite agreement. We had a session about it yesterday with the local politicians and leaders from the system. And we've talked about supply of new homes still being vitally important. Healthy homes and neighbourhoods. We've got this whole thing about a healthy life and a good life for all in Greater Manchester. And within that, tackling inequalities, dealing with damp and mould. We're working on a good landlord charter, so everybody who rents in Greater Manchester, no matter who they rent from, should expect a certain standard and what to do if they're not get that standard. We'll have that in place by the end of the year. We're working on lots of health initiatives, and keeping going with the homelessness work and the inequalities work, and cost of living. We've been working really, really hard on cost of living together and support to communities. And then because it's a year of election, we're significantly ramping up our lobbying and influencing work. So, you know, we've got a great mayor here and we've got really good politicians. We think we've got something to say about the way we work together. So try and drive a bit of change through lobbying and influencing. So there's tons of work that we're doing. There's a lot of practical things that we do on things like employment, apprenticeships together, you know, we work on so many things together. And learn from each other. So RBH is Greater Manchester, and we've had a learning session with RBH. I think there's a bit of an accountability thing in driving up standards because we're accountable to each other a little bit. So obviously we're all independent organisations with our own board, but you know, we've got a chairs network. We regularly meet. We've got a whole architecture and infrastructure that supports this whole thing, and we've got paid employees now, and it's great. It's really good to be part of it. We've just got so much more that we want to do together, so it's working well.
It's amazing, especially that partnership working, as you say, coalition, which not only kind of work together but also drive each other to be better as well, which I think's fascinating. So Charlie, I've absolutely loved this conversation. Thank you so much. I found it fascinating, not only about your journey, but also some of the leadership traits and takeaways. I think the listeners all really value that. So before I let you go, though, we do some quick fire questions. So I will rattle these off for you. So what has been your most valuable leadership lesson that you've learned so far?
I'd probably go back to that thing around being fair and doing the decent things. So as long as you feel that you've been fair, you can't go wrong.
Very fair. And what advice would you give to an aspiring leader starting out on their journey?
I'd probably say, you know, be true to yourself and understand yourself and why you want to do what you're doing. Focus on the mission, not the title, definitely. Try new things even if they're a bit scary, but know when to say no and not be all things to all people.
Brilliant. And what do you believe to be the key leadership qualities required in today's world?
The whole thing about empathy is really important. So I think, you know, we all have lived experience as well, don't we? Or we try to understand the lived experience of others. You know, I've not talked about it necessarily today, but I've had, you know, a time where I was renting in the private rented sector. I've had time as a single parent. I've had, you know, quite a few issues that I've had to deal with in my life. And I think you bring those, don't you, into your role. And understanding others. So I think empathy and understanding that this job is about people, really, really important. I think problem solving, I think I referenced before, I think is just becoming more and more important. And, you know, understanding data requirements and things like that. But I think being adaptable and definitely approachable. Gone are the days of sitting in your office with your name on the door and all. I know who've actually done that, you know, in recent years. That's not the way to do it. It's like, get out there, be amongst your customers and your colleagues, and you know, just being dead approachable. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I've been in many of office like that, Charlie. That's for sure. So, and final question: one leadership book recommendation that you give to the listeners?
Well, I mentioned that Lencioni book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, isn't it?
That's the team. Yeah, that's the one.
It's not necessarily a leadership book, but it is something that has massively inspired me. And I can't remember the name of the author, but the book is called The Good Ancestor. And it's about the impact that you have today on future generations. And there's some practical exercises in it that sort of transport you back 50 years into your life and project you 50 years forward.
Wow.
There's, you know, the whole thing about the things that you do today and the seeds that you plant today and what they will mean in the future, and having some long-term thinking. And, you know, we live in a preposterously short-term society, don't we? And the policy environment is dead short-term, you know, it's pathologically so. So I think, you know, long-term vision and keeping an eye on the future, that book helps you to do it. It's really, really good. It really changed the way I thought about things. I mean, I do delve back into the short term, you know, but it's a really good book. So it's called The Good Ancestor.
Good Ancestor. We'll give that a Google once I finish. That's brilliant. Charlie, thank you for joining us on the Housing Collective podcast, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.